Optimi Health is a GMP-compliant pharmaceutical-grade manufacturer of MDMA and psilocybin. We've got CEO Dane Stevens here to tell us the Optimi story and how the company is leveraging market trends to drive growth. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Please remember this is neither recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Dane, thank you for joining us and taking the time to tell the Optimi story. How are things going?
Things are great. Thanks for having me, Martin. Nice to meet you guys, and yeah, excited to chat.
All right, great. We've got your presentation deck here. Why don't you do a quick walkthrough of the story so we get the overview, and then we can dig into some of the aspects of the story from there.
Sounds great. Yeah, Dane Stevens, co-founder, Optimi Health. It's a business that we established around 6 years ago during sort of that first wave of psychedelics, if you will, and we're located just outside of Vancouver. We have an office in Vancouver and in a town called Princeton, British Columbia, Canada, where, as you mentioned, we manufacture both pharmaceutical grade MDMA and psilocybin in finished drug formats under what's called a drug establishment license. And it's with that license that we are allowed to ship our products, package, manufacture, and export to regulated markets like Australia. And then we also supply clinical trials with both of these products. And so think like vaccine level production for both MDMA and psilocybin capsules, audited, regulated, and set to a high bar from Health Canada. And coming full circle to kind of today, I think it's easiest to sometimes chat about where we're at today. It's those drugs that we manufacture and then we ship out to Australia where MDMA and psilocybin have been rescheduled. And so right from our facility just outside of Vancouver, we ship our products to Australia where they're put into a pharmacy and then distributed to clinics around the country where our MDMA is now being prescribed for PTSD and our psilocybin finished drug products, naturally derived, I should say. So we operate with naturally derived psilocybin. We do the extraction process on site, and then we encapsulate our standardized extract of natural psilocybin into capsules, and we ship those as well for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression in Australia and supply various clinical trials around the world. So we are one of the only companies in the world that we know of that is able to manufacture those drugs and ship them around the world. And it's an exciting time, and I think what could be interesting to chat about today too is if we talked about it before was the cannabis rescheduling in the U.S. and how that is a great pathway for a company like ours to get our drugs into the U.S. if and when the U.S. decides to reschedule it, similar to how you have regulated ketamine throughout the country and now regulated cannabis coming up into the U.S. And if most of your watchers are from Canada, obviously we come from a market where we've had legal cannabis for a very long time. And these are different products. This is a pharmaceutical grade drug that is being prescribed in clinic that we make. And that's kind of the where we're at today. And a lot of work went into it over the last 6 years to get these drugs to market. But we can dive into that into the presentation. So yeah, happy to be here. And I think these are the things that we think make our company quite unique. And being an early mover, starting this, 6 years ago was something that, at the time, I think a lot of people thought we were crazy, but it was a very exciting time too when we started this, and we were able to raise the capital we needed to get our facilities up and running, and now bringing it to where we're at today. Over the course of those 6 years, a lot of work that went into the manufacturing of the products, building out the SOPs, the validated testing methods, and actually building a flywheel where we actually get these drugs, like I was mentioning before, from our facility in Canada all the way to Australia. And, it's all under license. And that took a lot of work to actually get there. So think, vaccine level, manufacturing of the products. And it's a huge thing that we're proud of. And I think what's also interesting, just kind of going to the next item there, the real world evidence of it is, so, patients in Australia, when they take these drugs, they actually report their outcomes. And we're building, or what's being used with our products is the very comprehensive data set of these drugs and how they're affecting patients in the real world outside of a clinical trial. Um, Obviously, all this is done through the global rescheduling or opportunity, predominantly in Australia. But as I was mentioning before with cannabis, it's quite interesting time to see these things actually starting to to gain traction, not just from the clinical side and the evidence that's being derived from around the world, but also making it into the clinics. You've seen, Johnson and Johnson get approval for their esketamine product, along with, wide use of racemic ketamine throughout the US. And we look to that as a really big opportunity for the companies to actually enter that market. All this is done vertically in-house, and so by owning the facilities and building that out early on over the last 6 years, um, that allows us to be really competitive, not from a cost perspective, but also control our own destiny in terms of a business and ship directly without the use of a middleman to actually reach the patient. One of the early slides, it says direct to clinic manufacturing, which is awesome. It's something that we didn't really account for when we started the business, but being able to do this product, build out two products at scale and actually ship them around the world is obviously something we're really proud of. And I think that really does differentiate the business overall. So, the two indications that we're focused on right now in Australia is PTSD and depression. There's obviously a huge unmet need globally. I think Australia is an amazing test case for how this can be rolled out in a safe and effective way and actually reach patients outside of a clinical trial. And so there's a lot of contributing factors you'll see online and a lot of movement from places like the Veterans Offices and Veterans Affairs, not only in the US, but in Australia now. A really cool thing that's happened is veterans in Australia now can actually get full reimbursement for the product for the treatment of PTSD or treatment-resistant depression, which is an amazing, part of a public available insurance reimbursement. So that's a huge milestone in there, and I think the biggest movement that people probably can connect with in the U.S. if they're watching what this is. That's the biggest movement in the U.S. is for veteran care for PTSD, and I think that's something that's being looked at as a pretty big opportunity for a company like ours to eventually reach the patients in the US and continue to grow our clinical footprint. The next slide is sort of the hero statement of the company. Australian psychiatrists today are now prescribing optimized GMP MDMA and psilocybin capsules for therapeutic use. So having two finished drug products that we actually make, encapsulate in-house, and then actually reach a clinic via a pharmacy partner and distributor in Australia is something that we're obviously really proud of. And when I think about, there's later slides here, but where we how much work went into actually getting these drugs to be prescribed to patients outside of a clinical setting. It's literally called the authorized prescriber scheme. And so in Australia, it's doctors with branded Optimi product, um, you know, treating patients with this over their therapy sessions. So it's a long time, but 4 to 6 hour treatments for PTSD or depression is it's an amazing feat. So kind of go into the products themselves, starting with next slide with MDMA capsules and how it works. And if your watchers or listeners or viewers are not familiar, this is a product that was designated to have breakthrough status by the US FDA. Been widely studied, most notably by a group called MAPS, and Lycos now is pursuing an NDA. For Optimi, what we do is we're focused on the authorized prescriber scheme, as I mentioned, in Australia. We generate around $300 per capsule or per patient, sorry, with a nice gross margin there. And this is something that we've been having in market for over a year now. And sort of the shipments to date have increased over time. And this is specifically for PTSD, but what makes our products and our opportunity unique is that the product that we make under our license, which I mentioned before with the drug establishment license, can be prescribed for any indication that the country allows. So, for example, if Australia wants to open it up for beyond PTSD, that same product can go and treat depression, or for certain. I know there's like different trials going on now for anxiety and wellness and things like that. So that's a huge opportunity that we see, and we see as just the PTSD treatment for MDMA is the elephant through the door. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the doctor once a rescheduling happens as to if they feel this could be an effective treatment off label for their patient. Obviously, this is when we started this 6 years ago, it was predominantly for natural psilocybin. We have one of the largest natural psilocybin genetic banks in the world. We actually grow the psychedelic mushrooms. We have 4 different fruiting rooms, 4 drying rooms, and processing for our natural psilocybin extract. This is obviously a very widely studied drug for a variety of indications. in Australia, predominantly PTSD, or sorry, treatment-resistant depression is what it's allowed for. So it was rescheduled specifically to treat treatment-resistant depression. We worked with directly with the TGA, which is the FDA equivalent in Australia, to have when you think of when these products actually make it to the clinic, they have to come with what's called a certificate of analysis. And what is that drug supposed to look like? Um, and so that's a really interesting thing for us is we have we were growing the mushrooms, we do the extraction on site, and now that we're actually shipping it into Australia, we had a really, it's just something that makes us all worth it when it actually hits there. And then the government and the regulators looked at our feedback of how that drug is supposed to look and feel as a finished pharmaceutical drug product. And so standardized for consistent dosing. As I mentioned here, it's been something that it's been newer. So it was our second drug to market. And that's actually a great slide. So going into the Australian playbook, direct to clinic model, I think I mentioned it earlier, but we make the drugs on site under our license, and actually we ship them, and the branded Optimi products are actually what's being prescribed in clinic and in Australia, which is a very unique model. Typically you wouldn't have the manufacturer actually have their product under their name in the clinic. And so that's a huge opportunity where we see this new way of delivering products from our facility to clinics is that cost is one thing, but being able for the confidence from the clinic or the pharmacy to actually be able to call up the manufacturer directly and order these products is a way that I think the world is going. You want to have direct access to where your medicine is coming from. You want to know how it was made. And the way that it works under a rescheduled environment is that we can actually ship under our license to these locations where it's authorized to be prescribed. Special access programs involving regulations. Obviously, this is well documented. Countries around the world are actually opening up a lot of access, similar, not quite to the degree of Australia as a fully regulated market, but in Canada, we've had a special access program where patients suffering can apply directly to the ministry for access to MDMA and psilocybin. You're seeing rescheduling opportunities, most notably the Czech Republic rescheduled medicinal psilocybin for patients, which started January 1st. So it's an interesting time, and I think we're seeing the breakthrough status granted from the U.S. FDA, and something that really keeping our eye on for the U.S. market. Next slide, it kind of talks about what does the rescheduling mean, and I think the best thing that anybody can look at is the cannabis rescheduling, and it's the same mechanism to reschedule MDMA or psilocybin in the U.S. or in any other country for that matter. Australia was the elephant through the door, and then looking at what it would mean for to have these products more accessible throughout places like the US is something we're keeping a close eye on. It allows physicians to prescribe them. It unlocks insurance reimbursement, which is what we're seeing in Australia, and so that is the biggest catalyst for the industry. Is keeping an eye on how that's going to look. And going down to the next slide, it does kind of lead into the landscape in general. We get asked this question all the time, like, okay, was that real? Obviously, the cannabis thing is interesting because it actually shows the mechanism of how it's done. And, it's been documented with the current US administration. People like RFK are widely, publicly supportive on record for generating access to people who need them, specifically, around the veterans community, but also just we're keeping an eye on the DA's office and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and looking at how they're looking at loosening restrictions around psilocybin, similar to how you see ketamine and cannabis. So the next slide is more of showing around the flywheel of how it works. Right now, as I mentioned before, we ship from our facility to our distributor and pharmacy in Australia. The patient then would go to the clinic, which would receive the drugs from the pharmacy, take their treatment, and then that clinic would apply for insurance reimbursement from the product, and then put their order in back through Optimi. And so for us, it's amazing, huge feat, shipped over 5,000 doses of our products globally. There's enough to treat over 500 patients right now, repeat orders. We look at the capacity that we have on site to manufacture, for hundreds of thousands of patients is, something that we're obviously really proud of, and we'll continue to grow this business. It's the focus of the company for 2026 and beyond. The economics of how it works, prices per capsule. I'm sure we can dive into that a little bit on the Q&A and, just to understand how the margins are. But We look at it on a per patient basis, and then try to scale our targets from there. This is all, this is not a forecast. This is just showing potential investors or people that are interested in the business of how it works and being transparent as we can around, what our margins are. This goes into the next slide of the opportunity around the world. Significant unmet need. We take what we earn approximately on a margin basis per patient, what we're selling capsules for, and then we translate that into the number of people suffering from TRD or PTSD. And it can give you sort of an outlook of what that could be as an opportunity. And then the slide that gets the most attention is the last one, the valuation drug comparison pipeline. We love where we're at. We feel like there is so much opportunity compared to other companies that, may never get a drug out of the clinic, out of the clinical trial. The biggest thing that we say about Optimi today is we're actually in clinic, in patient, and in market. And that's obviously the championing of our business now that we're doing. And we hear it from patients every day, like or almost every day, where we're making a serious difference in their lives. People have gone to the clinics in Australia or through the clinical trials that we actually supply on the manufacturing side, and they tell us how it's changed their lives. And that's someone in the real world. We talk about real world evidence and real world data that's taken both the RMDMA or a person that's being treated for depression with our psilocybin, and being outside and operating in a regulated framework with not just one but two drugs, and then looking at where we stack up to others that are still in clinical trials of significantly different burn rates than us, is the reason we're so excited, and one of the reasons we want to get out and tell our story with groups like yours, Martin. So last slide would be the team. Not everybody's on here. We keep a small team, but this is just some of the people that have helped get us to this point. And we can dive into that. But obviously, most notably, JJ Wilson is our chairman, and Jacob and Brian Safford are other co-founders, along with our Dr. Preston Chase and Karina Lanikoski, who Dr. Chase and Karina Lanikoski, they oversee the release of our products and the actual manufacturing of the drugs. So, stop there. Maybe this is a good thing to kind of take a break and circle up, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Dane. That was a nice overview on the company. Can you just differentiate? Australia seems to be really on the leading edge of this. Where is Canada on it? It is, I don't know, call it more progressive than other states, but other countries.
Mhm.
Like, how long until we're maybe at the state in is it a regulatory issue, or is it more of a doctor issue? They're not ready to
Yeah.
prescribe it, or where are we there?
Well, yeah. So, of the doctors we talk to, obviously it's biased because we hear from doctors, right? Like
Yeah.
we're in the industry, and so we're going to hear from our perspective. Every doctor that reaches out is like, oh wow, it seems like they all are championing it. I'm sure that's not entirely accurate, but the the Canadian landscape, you can access either drug through what's called the Special Access Program. The biggest thing for any country would be a rescheduling like Australia, right? So they would say, look, we want to reschedule not for recreational or take home. It's all for specific use within the clinic. And you can put guidelines in like that, like Australia has. So they rescheduled MDMA specifically for the use of treatment of PTSD. And they rescheduled psilocybin, whether it's natural or synthetic, for the use of treating treatment-resistant depression. And then from there, starting to potentially open up to other indications. And I think that's just like that's exactly how countries should do it. There's guardrails around it. Canada's, and sometimes it feels really progressive, and sometimes you hear from patients that are trying to access through the special access program and can't. So, we would be really supportive of any framework that models the controlled Australian model. And, we've talked to groups from the Netherlands, like I mentioned before, the Czech Republic. But yeah, we'd love to see Canada move faster, but that's not entirely how regulators work. So.
So in Canada, if there's a patient seeking this as a treatment option, they have to essentially apply to the Canadian government and they review it.
Correct.
It's not up to the doctor to prescribe it.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's what's trying to change. We would love to see change, right? It should be
Okay.
a relationship between the psychiatrist or the healthcare professional and the
Yeah.
patient. that would be, in our opinion, the most appropriate way for patients in Canada to access, like anything, right? But
In terms of,
it's
I
working
find
its way
it
through the
in,
courts, and yeah,
yeah.
there's some challenges and things like that.
Yeah, I find interesting how MDMA is targeting the PTSD and psilocybin is targeting the treatment-resistant depression. In my mind, I'm no scientist or expert, they're very similar drugs, and you said the MDMA could be targeted towards depression as well. And it just got, is how much data is there in terms of the evidence, how effective it is, how much evidence there is for specific indications, and I would think there's a lot of PTSD and depression, or there are a lot of people with both of those are kind of coincident indications as well. Could you just talk about that evidence that is
Yeah,
established at this point?
the MDMA has been recognized by the US FDA as a breakthrough treatment for PTSD, but also we saw recently, I know Compass Pathways has a psilocybin product that is also now that was specifically for treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorder, but now it's being used, or they've filed another trial to do for PTSD for the same product essentially. So that's really cool to see. You're right, they do seem linked. There's tons of studies out there now, and we can um, the last thing I want to do is start talking about uh, specific numbers of remission from other studies because I don't want to misspeak. But
Yeah.
um, what there is, it's widely studied, but it's a couple great
And
links I
there's
can send you,
growing
Martin, as well.
evidence. Could we say
Yes,
that there's growing
yeah,
evidence that it's
there's
effective?
growing evidence that's effective, not just from the clinical trial data, but also, as I was mentioning before, from the patients like on the ground.
Yeah,
The feedback has been overwhelmingly supportive from the doctors who are administering it.
yeah.
Um, and so that's the real kicker is you have both sides, the phased clinical trials, but then also now, an open regulated pathway for access of both. And you're seeing positivity on both sides. So growing evidence is amazing to see on both sides of that.
And I would guess as well that Australia is leading the charge, so to speak. A lot of countries, I would think, hey, we don't need to rush it. We can wait to see what kind of data we get out of Australia, and then after a couple of years, if things are going well, then that'll
Yeah,
allow us to move it forward as well. Do you think that's part of the strategy countries are taking?
I think that's accurate. The cool thing about that is is the pathway that we see the most appropriate. Where, okay, great, you have a test case. Countries can sort of de-risk and say like we don't have to be the elephant through the door. And I think they are closely watching. We hear that, from our partners there that they're getting phone calls all the time from different regulators around the world, and that's special to see the data that's being used, a lot of it's going to be used with our products. And so when countries look to say, okay, what happened in Australia? What drugs are they using? Oh, they were using optimized drugs. That's something that, we're getting a natural intro to. We had a really good conversation with a group in the Netherlands who's pursuing to bring MDMA into there, which has been on record for the government of looking to establish a regulated framework for PTSD in the Netherlands using MDMA. And so those are the really interesting parts of when you have the first regulated market reschedule these substances for the specific uses, then you have a whole global opportunity that sits in front of that, or behind that, depending on how you want to say it. But it's a huge yeah, it's just it's incredible.
In terms of competitors, I presume you're not the sole provider of this in Australia. Who are your competitors, and why does the doctor itself say, "Hey, I'm gonna prescribe the Optimize pill,"
Mhm.
or someone else's, or does the insurance company sort of direct that, or the
Yeah.
pharmacy, or how does that work?
Yeah, ultimately it's up to the clinic. There's some local manufacturing too. We're supportive of a competitive market. And what we've seen, and I can only really talk about what feedback we get is that we are much more cost effective for the clinic. And obviously, insurance likes that side of it too. They don't want to be overpaying. So, by being the manufacturer, we do feel like there's an opportunity that we will be afforded for. the foreseeable future where actually, the cost for us to make these products allows us to be in the conversation every time a clinic or a distributor wants to carry the product or a pharmacy. So that's what we're focused on. Obviously, it's healthy to have competition where, but we feel like we do have a very unique advantage by the being the company that actually is manufacturing and shipping it directly into the country via the pharmacy. And so that's the strength of our business. And yeah, that's how I'd
How does
answer
that
that. Yeah.
model,
Mhm.
sorry, differ from your competitors? They use distributors or like
Yeah, so I think
how does that work?
yeah, there's different ways that you can reach the clinic. And I think that it's hard to know exactly. I know that some have contract manufacturers. Like we could be looked at originally as you mentioned before, I think just when we are talking offline, as a contract drug manufacturer. So in theory, Martin, if you wanted to start a MDMA company and we could sell to you and you could then distribute it if you wanted to get into that business. Whereas we're able to go directly from our facility to the clinic via the distributor. And so there's things like CDMOs around or contract drug manufacturers or places or compound pharmacies where groups are putting together different things from other groups and then they're going to try and resell it. But what happens along the way is the cost goes up every time, and a new set of hands hits the product. And what we're seeing right now is that price sensitivity is really important, and the ability to deliver it on time, in the agreed pricing, and having it actually in the pharmacy ready to be picked up is something that we've worked really hard to do over the last few years.
What is typical of most of drug development companies is that they have a patented molecule and they're able to they've got approvals and patents that protect competition there. You're essentially a generic drug manufacturer, would that be fair to say? And is it through scale of manufacturing able to be the low cost leader that you're able to keep
Yeah.
barriers up, or talk about that aspect of the business?
Sure. So the way we make the products, obviously you mentioned it, is cost effective. We're solely focused on psychedelics. We have over 20 different psychedelics on our licenses, but the way that we make the drugs, the way that we do this, for instance, the extraction process for our naturally derived psilocybin, these are all trade secrets that we use in-house. We feel like we have a really distinct advantage by actually focusing on just these two products right now. Whereas, if you have, as I mentioned before, you have a CDMO, they're doing, vaccines, they're doing other chemicals, other compounds, other manufacturing for many different places. We're solely focused on these two psychedelics. And we're not just focused on the actual manufacturing, but, helping the businesses or the pharmacies on the other side of the clinics reach those products. So they're able to contact us directly and ship it out, without any middleman involved. And I think that's a huge value add when you're talking about controlled substances. And just beyond that, it's one thing to sort of have patents or IP, and it's another to actually make these drugs at scale, consistently in a pharmaceutical level environment, actually ship them around the world to get the licenses to these. Like I mentioned, these are controlled substances that a lot of countries are you know wary about having go for the chain of custody command, things like that when you ship into the country. So there's a lot of it's one thing to do the products itself, but it's also to actually operate the company and the business and actually get these drugs to market into the patient consistently. And I think one of the things that we think about as our IP is we've developed all of the operational procedures to actually make these drugs. And you have to hire the people, you get the licenses, you build the facilities, you have clean one-way airflow throughout the whole building. You have to maintain that level of compliance, which is, in these substances, no easy feat. Obviously, I give a lot of credit to the team, but yeah, our strategy is not, hey, we have these patents. It's how many patients and how fast can we roll this business out?
You have on your unit economics here. I'd like to go into this as well. And one aspect of it, you talked about how much some of the mushrooms that you grow.
Mhm.
Like, how big is your capacity, and or how much would it like? What percentage of capacity utilization are you at? And is it expensive to expand that when as the company grows? And I guess at the end of it, what is I don't believe you're profitable at this point. At what level of scale do you need to be at to
Mhm.
hit break even and then turn a profit?
Yeah. Yeah. So if we look at the margin or the profit per patient, for us, once we hit around 1,000 patients a month, that would be, break even for the company and then into positive EBITDA, which is when you think about how many patients, for example, in the US market, if and when that opens up for the company, Johnson and Johnson is doing, I think it says in the deck around 46,000 patients a month. And so for us to, right now in Australia, we can see our pathway to getting to 1,000 patients a month just in the Australian market alone to actually hit break even as a business based on the gross margins that we have today. We're utilizing less than 5% of our capacity right now. Obviously, the market isn't quite there yet to sell
Yeah.
those super high volumes, but that's part of being early. That's part of being ready. So when that switches, whether the next market opens up or the access continues to grow, which we're seeing in Australia, is it is, what we're super optimistic about. We've sent in enough product to treat, around 500 patients now, but looking into 2026 and 2027, we're seeing a significant increase in prescribers and clinics and hospital networks coming online. So it'll be a big year for us, 2026, and I think 2027 is when we will see that. That positive EBITDA is what we're looking at. But, things can change. These are, as I mentioned, heavily regulated. There is a framework that needs to be followed. It's not something that we can go out and rush. So yeah, when we look at it, we have all of our capex in Martin. Like when we raised our initial tranche of capital 5 years ago, that was able to sustain the business along with support from the Lululemon family to bring this to where it is today. And we look at it and we go, okay, it's as the orders scale, we'll scale with the orders. Obviously, we're going to push to reach as many clinics and patients as possible, and we have the capacity to do that at scale without having any more capex be put into the business.
Since you mentioned it, we talked about leadership. You mentioned the Lululemon family, JJ Wilson. People maybe are only now connecting those dots. Can you
Sure.
explain that relationship there?
Yeah, so one of our co-founders, along with Jacob and Brian Safrick, obviously they no strangers to success with Lululemon, and it's just
JJ
very
Wilson being of Chip
the son of
Wilson
Yes,
family.
yeah, yes,
Okay.
correct. JJ's Chip Wilson's son. He's the chairman of
Okay.
our JJ's the chairman of Optimi Health. Chip's been an advisor to the company since we founded the business 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And so to have that sort of support from, one of the greatest success stories in, Canadian business ever with Lululemon, it's a global brand. Being able to leverage those thoughts, those ideas, that leadership is huge for us.
Yeah.
And JJ's been a partner of ours and our chairman since the inception of the company.
So, Dane, can you talk a little bit about you've talked about investors. Let's say your current burn rate, or how much more capital are you going to need to raise, and what is your general capital markets strategy here? How to grow the business?
Great. Yeah. So throughout 2025, we did file and worked, quite hard on an F1 registration statement, which is on record now since September. And in 2026, we will be pursuing capital raise. This is no solicitation for that, but it's something that we did file publicly with the SEC for proposed uplisting to the Nasdaq. So we'll continue to push in that area. For us, the main market for anything biotech related is the US market.
Yes.
It's the largest, it's the largest pharmaceutical market in the world. That's where all the pharmaceutical investors
Yeah.
live. I think it's a quite natural story when we look at where we fit into that ecosystem. If and when we do execute the proposed uplisting, we would be, as I mentioned on that last slide, one of the only companies in the world with drugs in market outside of a clinical trial. And
Yeah.
that's what has us most excited. The CSE has been great. It's been great for us to get, the capital we needed to date, but ultimately, I think it's time to tell the story. And this is one of the reasons we're doing this interview, Martin, and hopefully others
Yeah.
as we go forward. So that is our strategy for 2026, and we're quite optimistic about what that could look like, and I'll leave it at that.
And
Yeah.
with like in part, you are. I don't know, handcuffed or constrained by the regulatory process. And it's not like a typical FDA filing
Mhm.
where you're trying to get a drug through. This is a big political thing. Who's going to allow it? What are you, do you have other growth initiatives in the meantime to other lines of business or other opportunities? Or is it a bit of a waiting game for governments to get their regulatory systems in place?
Yeah, we have enough, for 2026 and 2027 ahead of us. As you mentioned, these regulatory things do provide some challenges. We're not focused on the things we can't control. We're focused on, the patients today in Australia. We're focused on supplying clinical trials. We ship product to, MAPS, Israel, which is a, partner of ours for MDMA studies. And, we're looking at places like the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, that'll be the next markets to open up. The ability that we have from the facility, as I mentioned earlier, to ship these products anywhere around the world under license with permits provides a really unique opportunity for us to scale all around the U.S. if and when the U.S. opens. And so for us, we're, like I said, we've got enough clinics to call and enough patients to treat between now and a U.S. rescheduling event. But we're ready, and that's the hardest part is to actually get to the point that we're at today. And we're just looking at it very optimistically.
All right, Dane, thank you very much. Any final comments here before we wrap it up?
No, it was great to connect with you. Tell the Optimize story. Let your viewers know who we are, and happy to answer any questions they may have going forward. And no, it was great to talk to you, Martin. Appreciate your time today.
All right, Dane, thank you very much. I look forward to getting you back here as the business progresses and you get more things done here. So thank you very much. Have a great day and talk to you again soon.
You too. Take care.